Wrapping up our Rated XDR series, we'll discuss XDR and what it means to you. I'm Randy Watkins, and this is Son of a Breach. Welcome back to Son of a Breach. Today we are wrapping up our Rated XDR series. If you haven't been following the series, we essentially set out to talk strategy with some of the industry pioneers that are building extended detection and response platforms. We interviewed leaders from 4 of Critical Start's integration partners and really wanted to understand what their perspective was on the market, with each interview being a previous podcast. So I'm not going to dive into each interview, but rather more what I'm seeing in the market and general thoughts after talking to each of the guests. If you do want to go back and listen to specific manufacturers, please refer back to the last few podcasts to really hear about their platform, their strategy. Now, let's start with defining XDR. So, of course, it stands for Extended Detection and Response, but there's really no defined requirements for XDR as a platform. It's really just a marketing term that's kind of being used to describe anything where you're detecting across multiple products. And I think we kind of have to take it at face value, because in talking to our 4 different guests, plus some of the other manufacturers that play in the XDR space, there are different requirements that they consider to be essential for a platform to be called XDR. So certain things like native versus hybrid XDR, where native encapsulates all of the capabilities necessary to be an XDR platform, whereas a hybrid is integrating with other third parties. That's something that needs to be considered when you're choosing your approach towards an XDR strategy. And those are different requirements that have some subjectivity to it, because definitionally it still does do extended detection and response. It's just a matter of, will it leverage third-party data or not? Something else to keep in mind when you're evaluating XDR platforms is when they say extended detection and response, what kind of detections are those? So are they detections that you're going to have to go in and build, and they're merely giving you a back end to detect across multiple alert sources? Because I would argue that that's very SIEM-like functionality. What we should be expecting out of our extended detection and response platforms is automated detection capabilities, automated root cause analysis, where they're really combining those sources together after normalizing them, performing model development across multiple alert sources, and having that baked into the platform. So it's not something we're expected to administer or manually enter. The other thing that frequently gets brought up with XDR is an evolution of EDR. Is it replacing SIEM? And I asked a few of our guests, and it seems like the answer is probably inevitably it will replace SIEM. It's definitely an evolution of EDR, right? The whole premise behind XDR is that we're starting with very high fidelity sources where we can do root cause analysis like the endpoint, and then we're adding context to get additional detection capability as we grow our alert sources that we're ingesting. But when we look at that capability compared to a SIEM and why most security organizations use SIEM as a means to centralize the data, once it's all flowing into an XDR platform, it's going to be really hard to not think about displacing SIEM. And if you look at SentinelOne and CrowdStrike, both of them acquired SIEMs and really kind of are baking it into their platform now, so they will have a competitive offering. And with Palo Alto's XDR version 3 release, they very much can function as what most customers expect out of their SIEM. And looking at Microsoft, Azure Sentinel is marketed as a SIEM platform. It works extremely well as a SIEM platform. And once you start tying in Microsoft's capabilities around their own product suite, as well as the orchestration built into it, it functions very much like a SIEM displacement and an enhancement to the EDR capabilities with XDR, full XDR capability. I do think this is going to displace SIEM. Then it's going to be more of a question of, why are we maintaining SIEM? And that comes down to a whole compliance conversation that's going to have to be had in the near future. I have a couple of blogs coming out about that, my overall stance towards compliance. But eventually we should expect XDR to displace SIEM. We should have that on our roadmaps to start combining the SIEM functionality or the expectations we have out of SIEM, the needs that we have out of SIEM. We should expect to be able to combine that with our XDR platform, start doing some unification on the security front. While Critical Start works with the 4 guests that I interviewed, There are a lot of other XDR platforms out there from some other large manufacturers like Trend Micro. There's also open XDR platforms where they really don't make a product, but more of just a unification product. Some of the ones that quickly come to mind, like Strike Ready, a more traditional approach, gathering the telemetry and building the detections, Query AI, more of a decentralized approach, querying the data where it lives on all the different data sources, kind of building the logic back end. There's a couple of different options when you are looking at XDR platforms. So if you do have a significant security investment, an existing portfolio company, it's worth checking out their technology just to see if you can kind of implement XDR capabilities in place. But if you're either a hodgepodge of best-of-breed technology or you have kind of just product sprawl across the organization, it may be worth looking at a third-party XDR platform or doing some kind of unification across the product sets if you can, and looking into one of the manufacturers for a more long-term strategic view.
Now, I've talked about EDR and SIEM and how those play into XDR, and you can also put NDR in there as well. NDR is network detection and response. So think your Snorts or your Bros, Zeeks, Vectras, Darktraces. Those are often another feed into the XDR platform. That's actually how Palo Alto got started with their XDR platform. The acquisition of LightCyber, taking the data from Traps and Secdo and combining it with the network data from their firewalls. And that kind of all wrapped up together to form Cortex. So NDR, EDR, SIEM are kind of rolling into that XDR component. And I've seen a few blogs recently start bringing MDR into the mix. And how does XDR compare to MDR? And that's not really a correct comparison, because MDR is the managed detection and response component. So it's taking in the feeds and using the capabilities of your existing detection and response products, and it's adding that 24/7 managed component on top of it. So those two things aren't really a versus. MDRs will leverage the XDR platform, or should leverage the XDR platform of choice at the customer's site. Now, most MDRs actually provide detection and response capabilities across multiple products inside of a single customer's environment. So for a long time, we've been technically a quote unquote MXDR. And that's another acronym that we're starting to see kind of work its way into the space. And that may or may not catch on. I'm really hoping it doesn't. We don't need another acronym. But if you're looking at the MDR space, know that most of the MDR options are MXDR. There are a few that only manage one product, or they'll only lean on EDR. But by and large, most of, I'll say us, including Critical Start in the MDR space, we do pull in feeds from other SIEM products and network detection products. MXDR, I really hope it doesn't happen. I wish they would stop trying to make fetch a thing, but like most acronyms, they eventually do catch on. So we'll see that. But MXDR is really just a managed component, the 24/7 monitoring component sitting on top of an XDR platform. Sometimes those MDR providers will make their own XDR platform, but I really don't see the need. If you already have an XDR platform, let's centralize all the data on your site, bring it into a third-party platform. But I digress in the MDR space. The real question that you want to ask, if it's the MDR provider claiming to be MXDR, it's not about how many sources you can bring in. It's about what you can do with those data sources. And when you're sending that information to a third party for resolution, triage, response, things like that, you have to ask if that alert source is going to answer more questions than it generates. And if it's going to generate more questions and it's a third party that's getting these alerts, then who's going to answer those questions? It's just going to be put back on the customer. So if you're looking at a managed detection and response service or MXDR, and they're bringing in all these different feeds, really ask yourself what value they're going to be able to provide around that. That's my spiel on the MDR piece. I'll kind of get back on track here. So the last thing I want to talk about in this episode is kind of analyst coverage, because most folks do look to Gartner and Forrester for a lot of the happenings in the space. And it's not actually been bad coverage. I've talked a lot on both sides between Gartner and Forrester. I think Allie Mellon is doing a great job at covering the XDR space. She's putting out a lot of really foundational content that is defining the space, answering some frequent questions. So I would follow her content, but it seems like everybody is on the same page here. XDR is the ability to leverage the endpoint as a primary source in detection while bringing in additional context from log sources, network sources, identity sources, other third-party data to increase the fidelity and automation of root cause analysis. So it's really an evolution of EDR that's combining multiple spaces into a single product set, thank goodness. Right. So hopefully there is some level of consolidation in this space. It seems like in talking to our guests that is what they're heading towards. Huge thank you to everybody that participated. Ajit Sancheti from CrowdStrike, Ann Johnson from Microsoft, Tim Junio from Palo Alto Networks, and Yonni Shelmerdine from SentinelOne. Thank you to all of the guests for taking time out of their busy schedules to talk to me. Hopefully this was a useful series. I am going to go into hibernation for a week or so and come out with a new series. I already have a good idea, so we're just setting it up now. Once I figure out what it is, I'll be sure to let y'all know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you again on Son of a Breach.